Moving into Maple Street felt like winning a quiet lottery. After years of cramped apartments, thin walls, and landlords who never answered calls, I finally had a space that was mine. The house itself was modest, a single-story ranch with white siding, trimmed hedges, and a small backyard for Marley, my rescue dog. The rent was affordable, and for the first time in years, I felt the fragile sense of stability. The street was lined with mature maple trees that swayed gently in Spokane's summer breeze, casting dappled shadows across cracked sidewalks. Houses built in the 1950s had that familiar, comforting aesthetic. Neatly painted exteriors, porches with rocking chairs, and gardens tended with pride. Retirees tended their lawns with soft murmurs. Kids rode bikes in driveways, and dogs barked in the evenings. But everything always seemed contained, calm. My landlord had warned me about one neighbor. "Don't mind the house next door," he said casually. "Old guy lives there alone, keeps to himself." Mr. Douglas was a widower in his late 60s, and from the few glimpses I had seen of him, he fit the description perfectly. Hunched, gray-haired, glasses perched low on his nose. At first, that seemed ideal. I liked quiet. I liked predictability. A neighbor who kept to himself seemed safe. I spent the first week unpacking boxes slowly, labeling shelves, arranging furniture. Marley explored every corner of the yard, sniffing bushes and circling trees. For a few days, everything was ordinary, and I reveled in it. I started planning routines, morning coffee on the porch, walks with Marley, checking emails, tending the flower beds. It was ordinary life, the kind I had craved for so long. Then came the first uneasy feeling. It wasn't loud or alarming, just a subtle prickling on my skin, like static electricity, a sense that I wasn't alone even when I should have been. I paused while arranging my kitchen shelves, glancing toward the window next door. For a split second, I saw movement. A narrow slit of the blinds had opened, and a pale face stared directly at me. It was so fast I almost convinced myself I imagined it. But my pulse raced. Marley growled softly, her hackles raised. I stepped back, staring, but when I looked again, the blinds were shut, motionless. I forced myself to breathe, telling myself it was curiosity, a lonely man peeking at the new neighbor. That night, sleep came fitfully, filled with imagined shadows and whispered movements outside my window. Within days, the sightings became more frequent. I noticed small, subtle signs, blinds twitching when I stepped onto my porch, shadows lingering behind the thin curtains, the faintest outline of someone standing in a window that should have been dark. Marley became more alert, growling at empty air, ears stiff. One evening, as I watered the flower beds, I caught him again. A thin figure pressed slightly against the window, tilting his head as if studying me. I froze, heart thundering in my chest. My instinct was to retreat, but a flicker of curiosity, or perhaps defiance, made me wave. Nothing. The figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I tried rationalizing it. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he was merely curious about the new tenant. I told myself these were harmless observations. Yet every day I became more aware of the spaces between us, the subtle movement of shadows, the way light reflected off the blinds in unnatural ways. The neighborhood, once comforting, became suffocating. Every passing car felt like a potential observation point. Every porch light flicker seemed deliberate. I started keeping a journal, noting times and movements, trying to establish patterns to prove that I wasn't imagining things. But the patterns were inconsistent. Mr. Douglas was clever, patient, almost invisible when he wanted to be. It was during one of these evenings, as I grabbed my mail from the box, that I noticed the first sign that this was more than curiosity. There, slipped into my mailbox, was an envelope. No stamp, no return address, no markings. Inside were 3 photographs. My heart leapt and then sank. The first photo showed me carrying groceries from my car. The second, sitting on the porch, reading a book. And the third showed me asleep on my couch, the camera angle unmistakably from my window. My hands shook violently, dropping the photos to the ground. Marley whined and pressed against me. I ran next door, pounding on Mr. Douglas's door. No answer. Only the slight movement of his blinds, like a warning. After the photographs, paranoia set in. I bought blackout curtains and drew them tight. I slept in shifts with Marley curled against me, checking every sound, every creak. But the feeling of being watched persisted. At 2:30 a.m., she growled at the window. I sat up and saw him, Mr. Douglas, in the faint glow of the streetlight, staring directly at me. The stillness of his figure and the unblinking gaze froze me in place. The psychological strain became unbearable. Every step outside, every routine, every glance across the street carried weight. The once comforting street, lined with maples, now felt like a stage for surveillance. I could hear every whisper of wind against the siding, every distant car, and interpret it as a threat. I tried the police again. Their response was procedural, clinical. Creepy, one officer said, but hard to prove. Their lack of action made the tension worse. I felt trapped in my own home, forced to rely solely on my instincts for protection. The next week, I awoke to faint noises inside the house. A soft click, like a door latch. Marley barked furiously. My heart raced. I grabbed my phone to dial 911, but the unmistakable sound of blinds lowering from the living room froze me. From inside my own home, sleep became impossible. I took to sleeping in shifts, securing windows, checking locks multiple times each night. Every noise became a potential threat, every shadow a signal. 2 nights later, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of shuffling outside my window. Marley growled low, her hackles raised. I peeked through the curtains. Mr. Douglas stood in his yard, head tilted, motionless, observing. I backed away. My pulse rattled my chest. The quiet street now felt like a trap. I realized then that the danger wasn't just the neighbor. It was the invasion of my private space, the subtle control over my routines, my perception, my comfort. It was psychological, deliberate, and precise. I had to escape. By September, I broke my lease and moved in with a friend across town. The relief of leaving was profound, yet the lingering paranoia remained. Every window I passed, every shadow on a wall, I imagined eyes following me. The streets felt smaller, the trees less protective. Safety is fragile. Danger does not always announce itself violently. Sometimes it observes, waits, and quietly infiltrates the spaces you trust. Awareness, vigilance, and trusting your instincts are not paranoia. They are survival skills. Once you've had a neighbor who watches, you carry that awareness forever. You never truly feel alone again. I thought buying a house would finally give me peace. Years of cramped apartments, noisy neighbors, and broken plumbing had left me exhausted. When I found the pale blue 2-story on Willow Bend in Salem, I felt a strange, long-awaited relief. The maple tree in the front yard swayed in the spring breeze, promising normalcy. It was modest, sure, but stable. And after years of scraping together rent and utility bills, I could finally call it mine. The cul-de-sac was quiet and orderly. Lawns were freshly mowed, mailboxes leaned politely, children rode bikes in the street, and neighbors waved from porches. My work as a dental hygienist paid enough to keep me comfortable, and I had routines. Morning coffee on the porch, checking emails, returning calls, and the occasional Friday night dinner with coworkers. It felt ordinary, normal, safe. Across the street, however, stood an anomaly. 112, Willow Bend. The house was larger than mine, with peeling white paint and a porch swing that sagged as if weighed by years of disuse. The listing sign had been removed months before, and yet the house never seemed empty in the right way. The windows remained dark, the mailbox empty, but the alarm system sat in silence, or so I thought. I hadn't noticed anything suspicious at first. Empty homes, after all, are common in any neighborhood. That changed the first Saturday in May. I I was reading in bed when a shrill, piercing shriek ripped through the cul-de-sac. The alarm at 112 Willow Bend blared like an emergency siren, red light flashing from the second-floor window. I froze, staring at the dark house across the street. The street was empty. No neighbors came out. No dogs barked. Just that awful, echoing alarm. It ended as suddenly as it began. I rubbed my eyes, telling myself it was probably a glitch or a false alarm. But when I mentioned it to Mr. Allen, the retired man next door, his reaction unsettled me more than the noise. "Oh, that house," he muttered. "Been empty for years. Kids sometimes mess with it. Don't worry yourself." I nodded, but his avoidance felt like a warning. Something about the way he spoke, hurried, like brushing off something serious, made the hair on my neck prickle. That night, I lay awake listening for sounds that weren't there, the alarm still ringing faintly in my mind. The disturbances started gradually, almost innocuously. At first it was the alarm again, this time at 1:42 a.m. I woke to the shrill tone vibrating through the night. My pulse raced. Peering through the blinds, I noticed the porch swing moving slowly, rhythmically, but no one sat in it. The swing moved like it was alive. My heart thumped in my chest. Sleep eluded me. I began jotting down the times, noting patterns. Always midnight to 4 a.m., alarms lasting less than 5 minutes, and always the silence after. My neighbors never came out. I felt like I was being tested, watched. A few days later, while unloading groceries, I noticed him for the first time. A tall, thin man, gray shirt wrinkled and untucked, standing in the driveway of 112, motionless, watching. My fingers froze around the bag handles. I forced a smile, attempting casual conversation. "Are you the new owner?" I asked. He didn't respond. Just turned and walked around the side of the house. When I glanced back, he was gone. My stomach twisted into knots. I called the non-emergency police line once, desperation seeping into my voice. "There's a pattern. Someone's triggering the alarm repeatedly," I explained. "We'll send someone," the dispatcher said politely. But no one arrived. The next morning, a note was tucked under my windshield wiper. "Stop calling. The house is fine." I hadn't told anyone except the dispatcher. Fear settled deep into my chest. The house on Willow Bend wasn't empty. By early June, the alarms were a nightly ritual. I attempted to catch whoever it was, sitting on the porch with my phone ready. At 2:27 a.m., the shriek began again. I lifted my phone to record, heart hammering. And then I saw it. A face, pale and expressionless, pressed against the second-floor window of 112, staring straight at me. I dropped the phone in shock. When I looked again, it was gone. My hands trembled, and I could barely breathe. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak, every shadow, every gust of wind felt deliberate. A week later, I saw the gray-shirted man again. Only this time, he wasn't at 112. He stood in my yard, closer than before, head tilted, watching. I backed into my car, locked the doors, and waited until he vanished. The psychological strain became unbearable. I started checking every corner of my house, locking doors, double-checking windows. I felt trapped in my own home. The tension escalated one night when the alarm didn't come from 112. It came from my own house. My front door keypad flashed red, shrill tone echoing through every room. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed, shaking, and ran to the door. No one was there. Across the street, 112 sat dark, untouched. But the porch swing moved, back and forth. My stomach dropped. Fear had followed me home. It wasn't enough to avoid the empty house. The danger had crossed the line. I began documenting everything: times, sounds, shadows, anything unusual. Each day became a blur of caution. Every passing car, every neighbor's glance, every stray noise made my heart pound. 3 months later, I sold the house, breaking even just to leave. I told friends it was the commute, the stress of work, the rain. But I knew the truth. Some alarms don't just warn you, they are the danger. And sometimes, the threat isn't across the street. Sometimes it waits inside. Trust your instincts. Normalcy is fragile. Safety isn't guaranteed, and sometimes survival means leaving behind what seems like stability to preserve your sanity. Leaving Los Angeles wasn't impulsive. I had been planning it for months because Evan Parker, my ex, had become an inescapable shadow. He wasn't violent in the traditional sense, no yelling, no hitting, but his manipulation was subtle, relentless, and invasive. Texts arrived by the dozen, often asking about nothing but making me feel accountable. Where are you? Who are you with? Send me a picture. He demanded passwords under the guise of trust. He monitored every interaction I had online. And slowly, imperceptibly, he eroded my sense of safety. The final straw came when I found a GPS tracker sewn into my backpack. Holding that tiny device in my hand, I realized the depth of his control. Evan wasn't just watching me. He was dictating where I could go, what I could do. I knew I had to disappear entirely. Portland felt distant enough, quiet enough, and anonymous enough to give me a fresh start. I rented a small apartment in a tired brick building on East Burnside called the Garrison Arms. 4th floor, creaky hardwood floors, tall windows, and a balcony overlooking the streetcar line. Rain-soaked streets, gray skies, and the muted hum of the city gave me a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I started to reclaim my life, painting at night, biking to the design studio downtown, and sleeping without checking locks every hour. The building was quiet, almost too quiet. Families on the 2nd floor, a graduate student above, and Caleb Wright in 3B. Broad-shouldered, mid-40s, glasses too small for his face, and he moved at odd hours. Sometimes the creak of his door would wake me at 2 a.m. Other times I'd see him shuffle past the lobby with a grocery bag at 11 a.m. His greeting was always gravelly, clipped. Evening. For weeks I thought nothing of him. He was just another neighbor. Then June arrived. A bouquet appeared on my doormat, white daisies mixed with red roses, Evan's signature. My chest froze. Tucked inside was a card. You look good in this neighborhood. My hands shook as I threw it in the dumpster. I tried to convince myself it was a misdelivery, a prank, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Later, I showed the footage from the tenant app to my coworker, Sarah. Maybe a delivery mix-up, she said, sipping her coffee. Or a fan. Portland's full of weirdos. Her words didn't comfort me. That night I watched the footage again. A hooded figure entered at 2:16 a.m., dragging a left foot. Evan's old skateboarding injury caused him to limp the same way. My sanctuary felt fragile. Something had shifted and I wasn't ready for what was coming. The disturbances began almost imperceptibly. At first it was gentle knocks at night, too soft to be threatening but persistent enough to unsettle me. Shadows in the hall, floorboards creaking outside my door. I tried to convince myself it was stress or the age of the building, but the sensation of being watched never left. Caleb became unnervingly present. One evening, an apple rolled from my grocery bag under his door. He bent to pick it up and said, "You know, roses suit you better than apples." I froze. I hadn't told anyone about the bouquet. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice tight. "Just saying," he muttered and disappeared back inside 3B. My anxiety escalated. I installed the chain lock I had avoided using, checked doors obsessively, and avoided lingering in the hallway. Every pause Caleb took in the hall, every glance at my door, felt threatening. My apartment became a prison. One evening, returning from work, I found my balcony door ajar. I remembered locking it. A wine glass sat on the counter, fingerprints faint against its rim. My breath caught. I called my mother in California. "Maybe you're just forgetting things," I said, trying to sound calm. "Honey," she replied softly, "people don't forget doors opening themselves." Sleep became restless. Every creak, every shadow, every sound reminded me I was no longer alone. Someone shared my space, uninvited, and I didn't know who or why. A week later, proof arrived. A small white AirTag taped beneath my bike seat. Panic surged like fire. I took it to the police along with photos of the bouquet, past messages from Evan, and surveillance footage. The officer's face was sympathetic but hesitant. "We'll file it, but without direct threats, it's complicated," he said. Complicated wasn't enough. When I returned, Caleb leaned in his doorway, hands in pockets, eyes flicking toward my bike. My stomach knotted. Every shadow, every sound in the hall reminded me that someone too close was watching. Not just Evan, thousands of miles away, but someone present, Caleb. I fortified locks, installed cameras, and drew blackout curtains. My apartment became less of a home and more of a cage. Every subtle sound, the floor creaking, a door slamming, the hum of the streetcar, felt like proof of intrusion. Sleep became a battlefield. One night at 2:40 a.m., I woke to slow, deliberate footsteps outside my door. My heart pounded, then a whisper, "Still mine." I froze. Evan? Caleb? The uncertainty was worse than certainty. Morning came, and Caleb greeted me in the hall, faint scent of roses trailing him. I didn't respond. My art changed. Colors drained from my canvases. Once vibrant and expressive, my paintings now reflected anxiety, fear, and vigilance. Every car on the street, every stranger in the building, every bouquet in a shop became a trigger. My sanctuary was gone. Months passed. I learned patterns, avoided certain hours, carried keys like weapons. Yet the psychological scars remained. I realized fear often comes not from known threats, but from the uncertainty of closeness. The ex you fled from, the neighbor across the hall, they can be equally threatening when boundaries are violated. Black sedans passing, footsteps in the hall, roses delivered to work. Everything reminded me how fragile safety truly is. Vigilance is not paranoia. Protecting yourself is necessary. Running isn't weakness, it's survival. And sometimes reclaiming your life means locking doors, installing cameras, and refusing to let anyone, however close, make your world small. I hadn't planned to return to Oregon. 12 years away felt like enough distance from Ashwood Lane, from the house I'd grown up in, from the memories that lingered in every corner. But life doesn't follow plans. A divorce, a failed freelance business, and months of scraping together rent in apartments with thin walls had left me with one option: my parents' old house at around 23 Ashwood Lane. Pulling into the cul-de-sac brought a rush of nostalgia. The tall firs at the edge of the street swayed in the October wind, casting long shadows over cracked driveways. Basketball hoops, weathered by sun and rain, still leaned slightly, and mailboxes bore the marks of years of use. For a moment, it felt like stepping back in time. But something was different. Several of the houses along the lane looked abandoned. Lawns overgrown, curtains drawn tight, peeling paint on doors, driveways empty for weeks or months at a time. A quiet hum of unease settled over the cul-de-sac that I hadn't remembered from my teenage years. Yet I tried to convince myself it was nothing. An economic slump, families moving away. I parked in front of my old home, the autumn leaves crunching under tires, and grabbed the boxes from my car. The house itself had been empty since my father passed in 2007, when my mother moved to assisted living. Stepping inside, the familiar smell of old wood and faint mildew welcomed me. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight, and the quiet was profound. I set the boxes down and took a deep breath. For now, I was home. That night, as I carried the last box from the car into the kitchen, I noticed a flicker of light across the street. Number 19. Supposedly abandoned, glowed faintly from a porch lamp. The house had been empty all day. No cars in the driveway, shutters closed. Yet the light pulsed on and off as if signaling me. I stopped, gripping the box tightly, and blinked. A second later, the upstairs window opened slightly, and a shadow shifted behind the curtains. I shook my head. It must be a trick of the wind, or maybe a tree branch brushing against the glass. My pulse quickened as I carried the last box inside. I tried to settle, unpacking slowly, arranging the furniture, brewing coffee to calm my nerves. But the image of that shadow lingered, crawling in the back of my mind, refusing to fade. The next morning, an older woman appeared in my yard. Short, wiry, with piercing gray eyes that seemed to look straight through me. "You shouldn't have come back here," she said flatly. I blinked, startled. "Excuse me? Do you live nearby?" "Next door, number 25, she replied, her tone clipped. Then, lowering her voice, she added, "People move in, but they don't stay. You'll see." I pressed for more, trying to understand her meaning, but she only gave a thin smile and walked inside her house, the door closing with a faint click. Her sudden departure left me uneasy, my boxes suddenly feeling heavier in my hands. Over the next 2 weeks, the unease escalated. At exactly 11:30 p.m., lights in the supposedly abandoned houses flickered on. Living rooms glowed with a soft yellow light, and shadows paced across windows. By morning, the houses returned to stillness, curtains drawn, doors locked as if no one had been there at all. One evening, I took my trash out and noticed my mailbox door swinging open, though I hadn't touched it. Inside was a note, scrawled in block letters. "You look just like your father." My stomach twisted. Goosebumps ran down my arms. My father had passed over a decade ago, and the words felt like a ghost reaching out from the past. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank by local kids. Maybe a neighbor with a twisted sense of humor. But the precision of the timing, the nightly lights, the note in the mailbox, made reason impossible. Fear settled into my chest like ice. Late October brought long nights and cold winds that rattled windows. One rainy evening, I was jolted awake by footsteps on the porch. Heart pounding, I crept to the window, parting the blinds carefully. A man stood at the edge of my yard. Tall, dark hood pulled low, features obscured. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stared. I shouted, "Get the hell out of here!" But there was no reaction. His stillness was deliberate, like he was testing boundaries. Then he turned and walked toward by number 19. The house that had been lit on previous nights. The door opened silently, and he slipped inside as though it were already waiting for him. The following morning, I went to confront the gray-eyed woman at number 25. Her house looked lifeless. Curtains closed, mailbox stuffed with old flyers. When I knocked, no answer. Peering through the window, the living room appeared empty, stripped bare. But I had spoken to her just days ago. Confusion and fear twisted inside me. Halloween arrived with a pale moon and cold wind cutting across Ashwood Lane. Determined to understand what was happening, I stayed up late, watching from my porch. Around midnight, murmuring voices reached my ears. Layered, indistinct, almost hypnotic. They came from across the street, from number 19. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. My own house remained dark, but every other abandoned home on the lane glowed. Figures stood stiffly inside, facing the windows, all looking toward me. The movements were unnatural, mechanical, as if rehearsed. I trained the flashlight on number 19. For a fleeting second, a face stared back at me from the upstairs window. My father's face, impossibly alive, pale and solemn. The beam wavered, and when I looked again, it was gone. Fear became a physical force, pushing me back inside. I locked doors, drew curtains, and tried to convince myself it was a hallucination. Yet deep down, I knew it wasn't. That night I packed quickly. Clothes, essentials, Marley's leash, everything I could carry. By the first pale light of dawn, I was driving away from Ashwood Lane, leaving the cul-de-sac behind. The houses, abandoned on paper, had awakened in ways I could not explain. Later, I tried to look up property records. The entire cul-de-sac was listed as foreclosed, marked for redevelopment. No recent sales, no occupants, nothing. And yet, the memory of those glowing windows, of the figures facing me from every house, remained. Safety is not guaranteed, even in familiar places. Sometimes the threat comes from the spaces we assume are empty, from the silence we trust. Awareness and vigilance are not paranoia. They are survival. And once a place like Ashwood Lane has watched you, that feeling never truly leaves. You carry it, quiet and insistent wherever you go. Moving to Queens had felt like a fresh start. After a messy breakup that left me questioning every choice, I wanted an apartment that felt lived in, secure, and a little lively. The old red brick walk-up on the 34th Avenue seemed perfect. Families lived below, college students shared units next door, and Mr. Salazar, the landlord, was a genial older man who always had a story to tell about the building's history. At 29, teaching art at a local high school, I thought I had my life somewhat figured out. My days were comfortable, lesson plans in the morning, sketching at night, listening to podcasts before bed. Routine became my anchor. I told myself it wasn't dullness, it was safety. I needed that. For the first few months, it worked. The building had its quirks, narrow hallways, creaking pipes, neighbors' laughter echoing through the walls, but nothing felt threatening. My small third-floor apartment was cozy, with sun streaming through the windows in the late afternoon, casting soft shadows on the hardwood floor. I could overlook the fire escape. It was old, iron, slightly rusted, but it gave the apartment a charming, almost cinematic feel. Then the first oddity occurred. One morning I woke to find my curtains open, though I had closed them the night before. I blamed myself. I'd been grading papers until 2 a.m., distracted. A week later, my phone charger disappeared from its outlet, only to reappear under the couch. Small, forgettable inconveniences, or so I thought. By mid-July, the minor incidents intensified. I began waking at odd hours, hearing footsteps in the hall outside my door that didn't belong to anyone I recognized. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like it had its own rhythm, a life I didn't control. The final warning came at 3:17 a.m., when the world felt thick with heat and humidity. I woke to a damp smell in the air, mildew clinging to corners of the room. My bed was empty, but not because I had left it. My front door was ajar. I froze. Heart hammering, I grabbed the kitchen knife, inching toward the living room. My bare feet whispered over the hardwood. Muddy footprints stretched from the fire escape window across the rug, stopping at the threshold of my bedroom. Someone had been standing there, watching. The next morning, I reviewed the footage from the small 360-degree camera perched on my bookshelf. My hands shook as the video loaded. At 2:47 a.m., a figure climbed silently through the fire escape window. It was a woman, thin, wet, her dress clinging to her frame, hair hanging like seaweed. She moved deliberately, as if she belonged. She wandered the apartment for nearly an hour, leaving nothing touched, nothing disturbed, then exited through the front door at 3:38 a.m. It was surreal, almost like a ghost, but the camera captured every detail, irrefutable and horrifying. 2 days later, while sweeping near the fire escape, I found a small glass jar tucked beneath the curtain. Inside was a bundle of hair, my hair, tied with red thread. My stomach turned. I recalled the gallery opening I had hosted in June, where a woman lingered by one of my paintings, a sleeping figure, and whispered to herself, "Do you think they knew you were watching them?" It clicked. The woman had followed me from the gallery. She had been observing me long before she entered my apartment. I called the police immediately. Officers arrived, reviewed the footage, took the jar, and left. One officer recognized the woman. "She's been arrested before," he said. "Trespassing at galleries, fixating on artists. Never violent, but persistent." Persistence. The word hung in my mind. She didn't break things. She didn't threaten me directly. But the effect was the same. My sense of safety vanished. Emily Chen, my neighbor next door, knocked after the police left. "I've seen a woman in the courtyard at night," she whispered. "Just staring at windows. Thought she was a squatter. Maybe it's her." Her words confirmed my fear. This wasn't random. This was deliberate, calculated. She knew the building, the hallways, the fire escape. Every creak and shadow became a threat. I could no longer relax, no longer sketch. My apartment, once my refuge, now felt like a cage. Nightly, I lay awake, listening. Pipes groaned, wind rattled the fire escape, footsteps echoed faintly in the courtyard. Every noise made my heart pound. I installed locks, window bars, motion lights, but none of it felt sufficient. The presence was psychological, invasive. The woman didn't need to touch anything to take control. Weeks passed. I could no longer sleep through the night. My sketchbook, once a source of joy, now collected dust. Each page reminded me of being watched, of my life turned into someone else's obsession. One evening, I stepped onto the fire escape to get air. Below, the courtyard was empty, yet I felt her presence. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, and for a moment I thought I saw her in the corner, vanishing the instant I blinked. I realized then that no amount of precautions could remove the fear she planted. This wasn't just about trespassing. It was control, intrusion, a quiet assertion that she could enter my life unnoticed, unseen, yet omnipresent. I reached out to friends, to family, but no one could grasp the insidiousness. "Maybe move," someone suggested casually. I laughed bitterly. Yes, leaving would solve the immediate threat, but she had already claimed my sense of security. She had left a mark that followed me. By fall, I broke my lease. I left furniture behind, items I had cherished, memories embedded in every corner. I moved across town to a newer building with cameras and digital locks, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. But it didn't fully work. I avoided eye contact with neighbors, shivered at creaks, checked locks obsessively. I had learned a terrifying truth. Sometimes the real danger isn't loud or obvious. Sometimes it's the quiet neighbor, the one who never argues, never bangs on walls, never draws attention, the one who watches. Vigilance matters, even in familiar spaces. Trust must be earned, and safety is never guaranteed. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones observing, studying, learning every pattern, and until they are discovered, their presence remains your unseen shadow. Being cautious isn't paranoia, it's survival. And once someone has invaded your life so completely that fear lingers, shaping every decision, every glance, every locked door. Moving to Portland, Maine was supposed to be the beginning of something new. After months of planning, I finally left, Derek as my emotionally manipulative ex behind. I still had scars from our relationship, constant jealousy, late-night texts demanding explanations, and a sense that my entire life was being monitored. For months, I felt like I was losing my own mind, questioning my choices, my friends, even my own memory. Moving to 912 Seawall Lane, a corner unit of a small 4-home townhouse complex near the waterfront, was my lifeline. The cul-de-sac was quiet, the kind of place where neighbors waved from windows and leaves scattered along narrow driveways. The corner unit gave me privacy, and number 11, the neighboring unit, had been vacant for almost a year. Its blinds were always drawn, and that empty space provided me comfort I didn't realize I needed. My work as a UX designer allowed me to set my own schedule. Most days I woke early, made coffee, and watched the rain hit the roof while answering emails and attending client Zoom meetings. Evenings were mine, sketching, reading, or taking slow walks along the foggy waterfront. Portland in the fall was beautiful, its gray skies and autumn rains soothing in a way that masked any distant city noise. For the first time in years, I felt free. I left my bedroom window slightly open at night, enjoying the soft patter of rain and the occasional fog rolling in from the water. I laughed again, cooked simple dinners without stress, and painted late into the night, feeling like I belonged somewhere for the first time. That Friday evening, I was upstairs in my office, a mug of tea steaming beside my laptop. Around 8:30 p.m., a faint thump echoed through the wall. I froze, ears straining. Probably the wind, I muttered, returning to work, though the sensation of unease lingered. An hour later, the sound returned, heavier, deliberate, like furniture scraping. Then a hollow creak, as if someone was pacing slowly just beyond the wall. My pulse quickened. Rational thought collided with instinctive fear. By 9:30 p.m., I heard a faint click, the door of number 11 opening and closing silently. I peeked out the window at the cul-de-sac. Orange street lamps cast shadows across the empty street, and the vacant townhouse looked still. Yet the sound persisted, deliberate and controlled. My hands shook as I locked my door, whispering, "It's empty. Nobody lives there." At 10:00 p.m., the whistle began, slow, deliberate, and eerie, each note drawn out in a taunting rhythm. I froze. It was inside my apartment now, echoing through the hall. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence outside. Just rain. Then the whistle returned, closer, creeping along the walls. I considered calling 911 immediately, but hesitation rooted me. I wanted proof, wanted to understand before alerting authorities. I grabbed a kitchen knife, crept down the stairs, barefoot, heart hammering. The whistling grew louder, deliberate, almost casual, as if mocking my presence. It emanated from my living room, my sanctuary, my home, felt violated. And there he was, a man sitting calmly in my armchair, hands on knees, body still, whistling the same slow, hollow tune. My gaze caught the glint of metal, a gun resting on his lap. His eyes never met mine. He didn't flinch or react. He existed as though I were invisible. Fear rooted me. I wanted to scream, but my voice failed. Then adrenaline surged. I bolted, pushing past the intruder, bursting through the front door into the pouring rain. Each step splashed puddles, the whistle echoing behind me, drifting down the cul-de-sac like a predator following its prey. At the far corner, I called 911, trembling. "Someone's in my house. He has a gun. Please hurry." Minutes later, officers arrived. The man was found sitting calmly in the vacant neighbor's unit. The gun lay beside him. No explanation, no resistance, no acknowledgement of my presence. A drifter, mentally unstable, no criminal record, no ID, no motive. They didn't know. Even after the police left, the fear remained. Every creak, every gust rattling the shutters reminded me of his calm intrusion. The rain, once comforting, now masked an unseen menace. For days I stayed with friends. I couldn't return to Seawall Lane. My mind replayed the man's serene, deliberate movements over and over. I felt violated, unsafe in ways I had never known. Sleep was fractured by dreams of that hollow whistle. I imagined him sitting in my armchair, patiently waiting, unhurried, untouched by fear or consequence. Even mundane routines became triggers, checking locks, ensuring windows were closed, testing door handles. Portland's autumn rain, once soothing, now brought unease. Each raindrop against the roof sounded like his presence. Each shadow in my peripheral vision a reminder that calm can conceal danger. I realized how subtly one person could claim control over another's life without a word, without confrontation. That realization terrified me more than the physical intrusion itself. The fear lingered, altering how I interacted with my environment, how I trusted neighbors, how I walked the streets at night. Eventually, I found a new apartment, modern, reinforced, far from Seawall Lane. Doors locked digitally, cameras in the hallways, windows secured. Slowly, I began reclaiming my life, though caution became permanent. I left the cul-de-sac behind, but the memory of that night, the calm, deliberate presence of a stranger whistling in my living room, never faded. I began small acts to regain control. Lights left on, doors double-checked, blind cords tied to prevent accidental openings. The rituals felt absurd, but each act of control restored fragments of peace. 2 years later, I still dream of the whistle. It creeps into my mind when walking quiet streets or passing dark windows, a haunting echo of intrusion I cannot unhear. The experience left me with a stark truth. Safety is fragile. Calm, controlled people can pose threats as great or greater than those who are loud and aggressive. Subtlety, patience, observation, they all amplify the danger. One deliberate person can shape fear without violence, yet their presence lingers indefinitely. Vigilance and respect for personal boundaries are crucial. Empty spaces are not always safe. Calm is not always benign. And sometimes, the quietest intruder, the one who moves with patience, observation, and control, leaves the deepest mark. Awareness, precautions, and trust in instincts are your strongest defenses. Because once the barrier between safety and threat is crossed, the world will never feel quite the same. I had been a rural mail carrier in Hollow Creek, Vermont for over 15 years. It was a quiet, predictable life, exactly the kind I liked. I knew nearly every resident by name, their dogs, their routines, even the birthdays of their children. Delivering letters and packages was more than a job. It was my way of keeping the township connected, a rhythm I relied on as much as the sunrise itself. September in Hollow Creek brought the harvest. Mist hugged the fields, curling around the maple forests like a soft gray blanket. The gravel roads twisted across miles of farmland, past homesteads scattered like forgotten islands. I'd been delivering along Maple Hollow Road for years. It took about 2 hours to complete the loop, stopping at familiar porches, exchanging a nod with farmers who rarely ventured beyond their gates. That morning, the air smelled damp, earthy, tinged with the faint sweetness of fallen apples. I drove my old postal van along the winding road, waving to a few early risers in their driveways, waving back as I approached the John Grayson farm. Something felt off immediately. The mailbox overflowed with letters and parcels, some tipping to the ground. I knocked on the front door. Silence. Light pushed through the thin curtains, and the knob turned under my hand. Unlocked. The kitchen was empty, the table set for breakfast. 2 mugs, cold porridge, newspapers scattered. Not a soul. A shiver ran down my spine. I checked the surrounding fields. No tractors, no dogs barking, no movement at all. Only the low, persistent hum of wind over cornstalks. I left the parcels on the porch, shook my head, and continued down the road. By mid-morning, I noticed a pattern. At Harrison Farm, pension checks stacked in the mailbox. At Lindsay Homestead, a half-drunk cup of coffee and toys left scattered in the yard. Doors unlocked, fields empty. Radios crackled with static, no signal. My radio, normally my lifeline, emitted nothing but white noise. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Even with 15 years of experience, I felt unease creeping into my bones. Something that shouldn't be there had replaced what I knew as routine. By noon, 12 homes along my route were abandoned. Mailboxes swung in the wind, front doors ajar. Inside, kitchens were set for meals never eaten. Newspapers lay open on tables, dishes unwashed. Toys lay scattered in yards as if children had vanished mid-play. The silence was oppressive, heavy. At the Petro homestead, the strangest sight yet awaited. A cold sandwich lay half-eaten on a moldy kitchen counter. The television flickered static in the otherwise empty living room. Family photos hung crookedly, faces scratched out with deep, deliberate lines. I stepped back, voice trembling. "Hello?" Only the wind answered, carrying a faint, high-pitched laughter, childlike, echoing, impossible. I called my supervisor, Marge Elliott, through my phone. Static, no response. I drove toward Hollow Creek proper, hoping for confirmation or a sign I had lost touch with reality. Every turn revealed more empty homes. By the time I reached what should have been the last few farms, panic had clawed its way up my throat. Every familiar sight, my decades of deliveries, the roads I had memorized, felt alien, as though Hollow Creek itself had shifted. I returned to town, seeking answers. Marge looked at me with a mix of confusion and concern. "Ethan, those farms don't exist, haven't for 5 years, bulldozed, industrial land now," she said. "What?" "I drove past them today. I delivered mail. I saw people, children, families," I stammered. Her face softened. "Ethan, I'm not saying you're imagining, but those roads aren't on any current map. They're gone." Determined, I grabbed my camera and drove back the following day. The fields looked normal in the bright sunlight, but shadows moved oddly, and the wind carried whispers too faint to understand. Where the Grayson home had been, there was nothing but tilled earth. Empty, silent fields stretched for miles. I drove slowly, snapping photos, listening. Somewhere behind the trees, faint laughter echoed. Low murmurs, soft footsteps, the hum of a life that shouldn't exist. I could almost imagine the mailboxes, the kitchens, the porches filled with families frozen in time. At dusk, I saw him. Bill Harrison. Staggering from behind a maple. His hair was gray, posture hunched, half drunk. "They vanished," he said, voice shaking. "One harvest night, decades ago. Government said it was for progress. Left the land cursed. Children still play at sunset. If you listen." I shivered, staring at the golden fields. Soft, distant laughter carried on the wind. The air felt heavier, as though the land itself remembered every life uprooted. Every step I had taken, every delivery I had completed for years, had been an illusion tethered to memory. The image of empty kitchens, toys abandoned mid-play, families erased from maps, haunted me. I never returned to that route. I transferred to another township, leaving the undelivered mail in my basement, unable to discard it. On quiet nights, the wind carries echoes, children laughing, mailbox lids clanging, footsteps along roads long vanished. Hollow Creek had erased its residents, but the land remembered. I learned that memory and routine can deceive even the most grounded minds. That what feels real, your familiar route, the faces of neighbors, the comfort of a rhythm, can be taken in an instant. Sometimes, the world we know is fragile, and the things we take for granted, families, routines, places, can vanish without warning. We must hold close what is real, trust instincts, and never ignore the quiet signs that something is wrong. The silent fields of Hollow Creek were a reminder. Emptiness can have a memory, and sometimes it whispers. I had spent years bouncing from one cramped apartment to another in the city, paying rent that felt like a small mortgage for spaces barely bigger than closets. When I finally purchased a modest ranch-style home on 45 Willow Lane, in the quiet suburb of Cedarwood, Ohio, it felt like a personal victory. At 27, I craved independence. A yard I could mow, a small garden to nurture, and evenings free from intrusive roommates. The neighborhood was exactly what I had imagined. Oak trees lining the streets, manicured lawns, and the faint hum of distant traffic from the main road. Cul-de-sacs curved gently, offering privacy without isolation. I could already see myself enjoying the calm, tending to plants, maybe even grilling on weekends. But as I carried boxes up the narrow walkway, my attention kept drifting to the house next door. Number 47. Its paint was peeling, the lawn unkempt, and newspapers had stacked up in the mailbox for weeks. Behind dusty curtains, I thought I saw movement, though I dismissed it as imagination. Then I noticed her. An elderly woman sitting perfectly still by the window, her eyes fixed on me as I adjusted the mailbox. She didn't blink, didn't look away, simply watched. I waved and she gave the faintest nod, her expression unreadable. My first instinct was to chalk it up to loneliness. A widow, perhaps, with nothing else to do but observe her surroundings. I reminded myself not to judge too quickly. First impressions can be misleading. By the end of my first week, I began to notice patterns. The woman, whom I learned was Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, appeared at her window almost exactly 5 minutes after I stepped outside. Watering the lawn? She was there, adjusting the mailbox. There she was. It was precise, almost ritualistic. I mentioned it to a neighbor across the street, but they laughed it off. "Oh, that's Eleanor. She's harmless, just likes to watch the world go by. Don't let her worry you." Still, there was an edge to it, a sense that someone watching you with that level of consistency isn't merely curious. They're invested. I brushed off the unease as paranoia, though a small knot of discomfort began growing in my stomach. By the 3rd week, the situation escalated. I discovered something in my backyard one morning. A set of partial dentures, damp and cold from the night air, tossed over the 6-foot fence. I froze, holding them as disbelief collided with fear. Security footage revealed someone had been in my yard around 3 a.m., though the image was grainy and unrecognizable. When I confronted Mrs. Whitman on her porch, she appeared calm, almost eerily so. Nightgown and slippers, her hair pinned neatly atop her head. She held the dentures delicately as though they were precious. "These are mine," she whispered, voice trembling slightly. "My boy. He would have wanted me to keep them." I stepped back, uneasy. "Your son?" Her lips tightened, eyes distant. "Tommy, you don't understand. He'd be proud." I didn't press further, retreating to my own property with my mind racing. The boundaries of reality felt thin. I'd encountered eccentric neighbors before, but this was something different. Obsession wrapped in grief. Over the next month, behaviors intensified. Doorbells rang at odd hours. 11:00 p.m., 1 a.m., 2:30 a.m., and shadows flitted behind curtains. Small, peculiar gifts appeared on my porch. A casserole she claimed was Tommy's favorite, a hand-sewn cloth supposedly made by him. Each object carried a layer of unease. I never knew whether to accept them or dispose of them immediately. It was late one Thursday night, around 1 a.m., when the situation crossed the line from unsettling to dangerous. I awoke to the sound of jiggling at the back door. Heart hammering, I peeked through the blinds. Mrs. Whitman stood there, prying the door with a butcher knife, muttering incoherently. "I know you have him. You broke your promise, Tommy." Adrenaline surged. I grabbed a nearby chair for protection, holding it between us. Glass rattled as she swung the knife, shards tinkling on the floor. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I had to keep her from entering fully. I dialed 911, voice shaking. Officers arrived within minutes, restraining her. Even then, she seemed trapped in another world, speaking of letters, wars, and promises broken decades ago. I learned that Thomas, her son, had died in Vietnam in 1969. Her fixation on the past, coupled with grief and dementia, explained the obsessive behavior, but not the terrifying precision with which she had monitored me. After the incident, I overhauled security, cameras, reinforced locks, motion sensors. I avoided being in certain parts of the house at night, wedged chairs against doors, and double-checked locks constantly. Even when the immediate danger had passed, the psychological impact lingered. Shadows, faint sounds, unblinking eyes at distant windows, all became triggers. Friends and neighbors offered sympathetic but dismissive advice. She didn't mean harm. Perhaps. But when someone has watched your every movement for weeks, sometimes harmlessness isn't enough. I sold the house 6 months later at a loss, leaving behind the yard, the garden, even small furnishings. Cedarwood, once a quiet haven, had shrunk into a claustrophobic, threatening place in my mind. Years later, I still flinch at unblinking eyes, avoid prolonged exposure to old neighbors' windows, and double-check doors even in the safest spaces. The ordeal taught me something crucial. Appearances can deceive, and grief or obsession can blur harmless eccentricity into danger. Sometimes the people who watch quietly are not just lonely, They are trapped in memories that invade the present. We must respect personal space, but also trust instincts. Precaution, vigilance, and attention to subtle warning signs can be the difference between safety and harm. Cedarwood taught me that what feels familiar and safe can conceal unseen dangers. The moral is simple: always trust your instincts, and never underestimate the quiet observer next door.